The airlock hissed shut behind Warrant Officer Marin Solis, and she stood for a moment in the equalizing chamber, listening to the pressure settle around her like a living thing. 7 months on Trench Station Kestrel, and she still couldn't shake the feeling that the ocean didn't want her here. It tolerated her, the way a sleeping animal tolerates a hand resting on its flank. She pulled off her helmet and walked into the corridor. The lights were wrong again. That blue-pink haze they'd all started calling the bruise, a wash of bad fluorescence that gave everyone's skin a color like they were already halfway to dead. Someone had put in a maintenance request 4 months ago. No one had come. Nobody came down here unless they had to. 3 kilometers of water above their heads. That was the number she kept coming back to when sleep wouldn't find her. Not as a horror, more as a fact to hold, like a stone in the hand. 3 kilometers. The Martel Corporation had sunk $2 billion into this station because the continental shelf beneath it held an estimated 40-year reserve of rare earth metals. And $2 billion meant nothing got fixed unless it stopped working entirely. And nobody came unless something was on fire or profitable. Marin was neither. She was a structural analyst, which meant she cataloged the ways the station was slowly trying to kill them and handed those reports to Commander Vasek, who forwarded them to Martel's regional director, who forwarded them to someone whose name she'd never learned, who did nothing. She was thinking about the hairline fracture she'd found in Junction 7 when she turned the corner and nearly walked into Dr. Fen Okafor. Fen was standing very still in the middle of the corridor, holding a sample container in both hands. Her eyes were open, but she wasn't looking at anything in the room. Fen. No response. Fen. Marin put a hand on her shoulder, and Fen blinked, stepped back, looked at the container in her hands like she'd forgotten she was holding it. Sorry. Her voice was rough, like she'd been somewhere dry. I was thinking. You were standing in the middle of the corridor not breathing. I do that. Fen smiled, and it almost worked. She was a xenobiologist by training, one of 3 scientists on Kestrel. She'd been brought down specifically to study trace organics in the deep sediment, biological signatures from things that had never been classified. She'd been quiet since the Meridian incident, though. They'd all been quiet since then. The Meridian was the station's supply sub. 2 weeks ago, it had gone to the surface for a resupply rotation and come back down, docked, opened, and been empty. Hatch sealed from the inside. No message, no emergency ping. The 4-person crew simply gone. Director Harlan had appeared on the comm screen within 6 hours. He was a small man with the face of someone who'd spent years perfecting an expression of concern without feeling it. He'd told them not to worry, that there were explanations for these things, that Kestrel's contract period was nearly up and they'd all be topside soon. He'd used the word team 4 times in 8 minutes, and Marin had counted everyone. Commander Vasek had cut the feed before Harlan could wish them luck. Now there were 11 of them where there should have been 15, and Fen Okafor was standing in corridors she didn't remember walking to, holding containers of sediment slurry, with her eyes somewhere else entirely. "What's in the container?" Marin asked. Fen looked at it again. "I don't know yet. I found it attached to the Meridian's docking collar when we cleared it out. It's not in any of our catalogs." She paused. "It's not in anyone's catalogs. I've run it against everything Martel sent us. Is it dangerous? I don't think so." The way she said it wasn't the way a scientist says it when she's confident. It was the way a scientist says it when she's hoping. "You should tell Vasek." "I will." Fen looked at her sideways. "I just need a little more time with it." Marin thought about the hairline fracture in Junction 7, about the things you find that you're not sure how to report yet. "All right," she said. "A little time." Commander Vasek ran Kestrel the way you'd expect a man to run something when he'd been told all his life that control was the same as safety. He was not cruel. Marin had worked under cruel commanders and recognized the difference. But he had a precise and calibrated faith in procedure that sometimes made him look like a man reading from a manual he'd memorized so thoroughly he'd forgotten the words were supposed to mean something. He called a briefing that evening. The 11 of them crowded into the ops room, which smelled like recycled air, and the particular brand of instant coffee that was all Martel's supply chain seemed capable of producing. Vasek stood at the head of the table with his hands behind his back. "Director Harlan has confirmed that the Meridian's crew are listed as missing," he said. "A rescue and recovery team is being assembled. EDA is 11 days. 11 days. Marin ran the math. Their oxygen recyclers had a maintenance window in 9. What happened to them?" This from Technician Brasso, a compact man from Gdansk who fixed things and asked questions in that order. He had the particular directness of someone who'd spent his career in places where euphemism got people killed. Unknown, Vasek said. Unknown as in we don't know, or unknown as in we know but we're not authorized to say. A pause. Vasek looked at him steadily. Unknown as in we don't know, Brasso. All right. Brasso looked down at the table. All right. What nobody said was the thing they were all thinking, that the Meridian had come back wrong, that something had been wrong about it since it docked. The air in the sub when they'd cleared it had smelled like salt water, and something else, something deeper than salt water. And Yoon, who'd gone in first, had said she felt like she'd touched a live wire. Just for a second. All through her. Fen was watching the table when Marin glanced at her. Her hands were folded in her lap, and she was doing that thing again, being somewhere else, quietly, just behind her own eyes. After the briefing, Marin caught her in the corridor. Tell me what it does, she said. The sample. Tell me what you've found. Fen was quiet for long enough that Marin thought she wasn't going to answer. When I'm in the lab with it, Fen said finally, I hear things. What kind of things? Not sounds. More like impressions. Feelings that aren't mine. She looked at the wall, then back at Marin. I know how that sounds. I know you, Fen. Say the rest of it. Fen took a slow breath. The Meridian crew didn't die. Or I don't think they died. I think they went somewhere. She looked up. I think something down here tried to communicate with them, and the only way it knew how was to take them somewhere to show them. The corridor hummed around them, the station settling against the pressure. Show them what? Marin asked. I don't know yet, but whatever left that sample on the docking collar, I don't think it meant to scare us. I think it was trying to reach out. She paused. I think we scared it. 3 days passed. Marin found 2 more fractures, filed the reports, heard nothing back. Fen kept spending hours in the biology lab. The rest of the crew settled into the low-frequency tension of people who know something is wrong, but have agreed collectively not to say so out loud, because saying it out loud might be the thing that breaks everything. Then Vasek called a second briefing, and his voice had changed. He received word from Harlan. The station's contract had been modified. Kestrel was to shift priority from geological surveying to site security. There was an asset on the seafloor nearby. Harlan's word. Asset that Martel had been tracking for 6 months. The crew was to avoid contact with it, avoid approaching it, and report any observation immediately to Harlan's office. He didn't call it an organism. He called it an asset. That's it? Brasso asked. That's the directive, Vasek said. What is it? That's not information I've been given. So we're supposed to guard something we've never seen, that nobody will describe to us, in the dark, 3 kilometers underwater. Brasso folded his arms. While 4 of our crew are missing. Yes, silence. I'd like to register an objection, Marin said. Vasek looked at her. Registered. I'd like to register a second objection, said Yoon, who almost never spoke in briefings. Vasek's jaw tightened just slightly. Both noted. We follow the directive. Later, in the corridor again, it was always the corridor. Marin found Fen sitting on the floor against the wall with her knees pulled up, her eyes closed. They know about it, Marin said. Martel knows about it. They've known for months, Fen said without opening her eyes. At least 6, maybe longer. That's why they sent me down here. The trace organics I was supposed to be studying. They weren't random samples. They knew what they were sending me to find. They just didn't tell me. She opened her eyes. I think they wanted someone to make contact on their behalf. Someone with plausible deniability. And now they're saying avoid contact. Because they've decided contact is the wrong approach. Fen's voice was very even. The voice of a scientist who has stopped being surprised by what money will do to a problem. Whatever it is down there, they want it gone. Not studied. Gone. Marin sat down on the floor across from her. The bruise light pulsed overhead. How bad is this going to get? She asked. I don't know. Fen looked at her hands. But last night I was in the lab and the sample showed me something. Or tried to. I think I was somewhere else for a few minutes. Somewhere warm. Pink and warm and very quiet. She paused. And there were people there. I think they might have been the Meridian crew. The thing about hearing something like that 3 kilometers underwater is that there's no way to walk it off. You can't go outside. You can't look at the sky and put things back in proportion. You just sit in the corridor under the bad lights and hold the information and decide what kind of person you're going to be about it. Show me the lab, Marin said. It didn't look like anything. That was the first thing. The sample was a smear of something translucent and faintly luminous in a containment dish, the kind of thing you'd pass over if you were looking for monsters. Fen had run filaments from it through a bioscanner, and the readings were, she described them as music, not in the acoustic sense, in the sense of structure, pattern, call and response. Touch the dish, Fen said. I'm not a scientist. You don't need to be. Fen looked at her steadily. I think it communicates through contact. Touch the glass. Marin put 2 fingers on the edge of the containment dish. The lab disappeared. Not dramatically, not with noise or light. It just receded, the way a room recedes when you're falling asleep, and what replaced it was an impression, not quite a vision, of somewhere vast and warm and suffused with that same pink-gold light she'd seen Fen describe. And there were structures, not buildings, nothing with angles, more like the inside of something living, curved walls and soft bioluminescence, and the sense of a kind of organized intention that she couldn't have named but immediately understood. And in that space, something was looking at her, not with eyes, with attention, the way you feel a room shift when someone very calm enters it. Something was aware of her, and its awareness felt like it was sorry. She pulled her hand back. The lab reasserted itself. Fen was watching her. Yeah, Marin said after a moment. Yeah, Fen agreed. They're not hostile. No, they've been trying to talk to us. Yes. Marin looked at the dish. What did they show you? When you went further, they're home. Fen's voice was careful now, choosing words the way you'd choose footholds on a bad descent. They're not from here. They came here a long time ago. They came here because their home was gone, used up. They settled in the deep ocean because it was the only part of this planet that was untouched. She stopped, and they've been watching us use the rest of it up. And they wanted to tell us what happens next, if we don't stop. They said that? Not in words. Fen touched the dish, and her expression went briefly somewhere else, then came back. But yeah, that's what they said. Marin thought about Harlan on the screen, using the word team. She thought about the Meridian crew in a place of warm pink light, which sounded like a terrible fate for people who'd gone to the surface for a resupply run. Then she thought about it a little harder and decided maybe it wasn't so terrible after all. We need to tell Vasek, she said. If we tell Vasek, Vasek tells Harlan. Then we need to tell Vasek in a way that doesn't give Harlan anything to act on. She stood up. And we need to figure out what Harlan's actually planning to do to them. She didn't have to figure very hard. The next morning, she was running a structural check on the starboard outer hull when she found the resonance array. It had been installed 6 weeks ago, according to the calibration date stamped on the housing. She hadn't installed it. Brasso hadn't installed it. Nobody on Kestrel's crew had installed it. It was a focused low-frequency emitter. She'd seen the design in Martel's equipment manifests, but they were rated for geological surveying. Except this one had been modified. The frequency range extended well below the survey band into the range that some of the older marine biologists called the death band, because certain deep-sea organisms, when exposed to low-frequency resonance in that range, simply stopped. Cellular disruption at a structural level. Not an explosion. More like a long, slow unmaking. 6 weeks ago, someone had come to Kestrel and installed a weapon, and nobody had noticed. She stood in the access crawl space for a long time, looking at it. Then she thought about the sense of attention she'd felt from the organism in the dish. That quality of awareness that felt like sorrow, like apology, like something very old, trying to make itself small enough to be understood by something young and frightened. She thought about Harlan's word, asset. She thought about the Meridian crew in their pink warm elsewhere, alive, it seemed, being shown the shape of what was coming. She pulled out a cutting tool and started working on the array's power supply. It took 40 minutes. Her hands were shaking, not from fear exactly, but from the kind of full-body recognition that arrives when you realize you have crossed a line, and there is no technical way to uncross it. She'd committed sabotage against a Martel installation. She had broken her contract, probably several laws, and made herself a liability in the eyes of a corporation that had already demonstrated it had no difficulty making people disappear. She felt, in the specific granular way that fear becomes clarity once you've finished doing the thing you were afraid to do, absolutely fine about it. She went to find Vasek. He listened. She gave him that. He sat behind his console, and he listened to everything she said, and he didn't interrupt. When she finished, he was quiet for a very long time. You removed it, he said. Yes. You understand what that means legally. I understand what leaving it in place means for whatever's down there. She met his eyes. Which has done nothing to us. which tried to communicate with us, which is, as far as any evidence suggests, a sapient species that's been living in our oceans since before recorded history. Vasek was quiet again. Fen thinks they're going to warn us, Marin said. About the earthquake, there's a seismic event coming. They know. They're trying to tell us. And if she's right and we don't listen and we're still here, then we're all dead. Yes. He picked up a stylus from his console. Put it down. I can't authorize unilateral action against a corporate directive. I know. But I can authorize a precautionary withdrawal protocol, pending a structural review. He looked at her steadily. If, for example, a structural analyst were to certify that certain stress indicators in the station architecture had reached critical threshold, she understood. I can have that certification ready in 2 hours. 1 hour would be better. She had 45 minutes, as it turned out. She was in Junction 7, camera running, documenting the fracture she'd found a week ago, which had in fact propagated another 2 centimeters since her last measurement. So the certification wasn't even technically dishonest. When the station shuddered, not a vibration, a shudder, the specific full-body tremor of something very large moving nearby. She pressed her hand against the bulkhead and felt it again. A rhythm, low and deep and almost like breathing. Her comm crackled. Brasso's voice, whatever is down there, it's surfacing. Or not surfacing, coming up, coming toward us. She started moving. The ops room was chaos of a very quiet kind. People running toward their stations without shouting. The particular controlled urgency of professionals who've been trained to be calm and are now discovering what calm costs. Vasek was at the main display. The sonar was reading something enormous 40 meters below the station. Life signs? Marin asked. Multiple. Yoon was at the science console. Dozens, maybe more. There, she stopped. They're surrounding us. Aggressive posture? Vasek asked. I don't know how to read their posture. Yoon's voice was careful. They're not moving toward us. They're holding position. Equidistant. Like they're waiting, Fen said from the doorway. She had the containment dish in her hands. Her face was very calm in the way that a person's face is calm when they've stopped arguing with what they know. They're telling us to go. The earthquake, it's coming. They came here to warn us directly. She walked to the display. They don't want us to die in here. The Meridian crew, Brasso said. He was standing at the back of the room with his arms crossed and his chin down. Are they alive? Fen said it without hesitation. They've been with them, safe. She paused. I think when the earthquake passes, they'll be returned. Nobody spoke. We need to move, Vasek said. The thing about evacuating a deep-sea station in an emergency is that there is no fast way to do it. Every stage of the egress protocol exists because the consequences of skipping it are immediate and fatal. You suit up, you check your suit, you check your partner's suit. You move to the submersibles in sequence. You do not run, because running uses oxygen, and you are never more than a broken seal away from the thing that wants to kill you taking its opportunity. Marin had run the drill 17 times. She ran it for the 18th time now, for real, and what was strange about it was how ordinary it felt. How much of what she'd feared in the abstract turned out, in the concrete, to be just a sequence of steps. She was third to last through the submersible hatch. Before she sealed it, she paused, pressed her hand against the outer hull. Below them, enormous in the dark, things moved. Not violently, not as a threat. They moved the way the tide moves. Inevitable, patient, following something older than anything she could name. She couldn't feel them through the hull the way she'd felt them through the containment dish, but she knew they were there. She knew they were watching. She thought about what it would be like to watch the species that was destroying your home. The species that had poisoned and extracted and drilled through every layer of the world above you and still choose to come up from the deep just to make sure they got out alive. She thought, what kind of thing does that? She thought, what kind of thing do we have to become before we deserve it? She sealed the hatch and strapped in, and Brasso punched the ascent sequence, and the submersible kicked upward through the dark water toward the surface. The earthquake hit 7 minutes after they cleared the station. They felt it as a pressure wave, the subjolting instruments briefly skewing, Yoon grabbing the handhold above her seat and closing her eyes. On the aft cameras, Marin watched the station flex, and then, in a long, slow sequence that looked almost graceful from a distance, collapse. Junction 7 first, then the connector to the ops module, then the whole thing folding in on itself with the ease of something that had always been temporary. 7 months of her life in a bruise-lit corridor gone in maybe 40 seconds. Nobody said anything for a while. How long to surface? Vasek asked. 90 minutes, Brasso said. 90 minutes underwater, in a submersible with 7 people, and the kind of silence that comes after you've just watched everything you've been doing for most of a year disappear. Marin looked at the porthole. The water outside was black and absolute. She thought about what was down there. The structures she'd seen in her non-vision, curved and warm and built by something that had learned, the hard way, what happens when you treat a home like a resource. Fen, she said. Yeah, when we get up there. What do we say? Fen had the containment dish in her lap, her hand resting on the top. The truth, she said. All of it. The array. What they showed us. What Martel knew and when they knew it. She paused. It won't be comfortable. No, Harlan will push back. He can push from wherever he wants. Fen smiled at that. A real one, finally. There's video, too. I had my recorder running in the lab for the last 3 days. The contact sessions. Everything I documented. She touched the dish. They communicated through this. I have logs of the bioscanner readings. There's enough there for any researcher in the world to replicate what I found if they have a sample. She lifted the dish slightly. And I have a sample. You're planning to publish. I'm planning to publish everything. She said it the way Brasso fixed things, with a specific final satisfaction. They've been living in our oceans since before recorded history, Marin. Someone kept them a secret so they could mine the seafloor. I think that information belongs to everyone. Above them, 90 minutes away, the world was continuing to be what it was. Boardrooms and spreadsheets, and men in suits calling living things assets, calling extraordinary things problems, calling the unknown a threat to be managed. The ocean didn't care. It had been here before any of that, and it would be hereafter. 3 kilometers below the surface, in the warm dark where the stations didn't reach and the drills hadn't gone yet. Something that had crossed the void between stars to find one small corner of a living world had folded itself around the ruins of a human outpost and waited for the shaking to stop, the way you wait beside a sleeping animal, careful not to disturb, and submersible. Marin Solis rode upward through the black water, with a sample dish full of something that was going to change everything, and thought, this is what we do, isn't it? We stumble into something vast and perfect, and our first move is to try to own it, she thought. Not this time. Above them the surface was bright with reflected sun. Below them the deep dark held its breath, and then, through the porthole, falling past them in the water column, slowly, gracefully, like leaves from a tree and no wind at all, came 4 EVA suits. Occupied, the Meridian crew, descending from nowhere, from whatever warm pink elsewhere had held them, being handed back. Brasso killed the ascent engines, reversed thrust. Yoon was already on the exterior docking arms, guiding them in. The suits came alongside the submersible one by one, and the magnetic clamps caught and held. They weren't dead. The biometrics lit green as each one connected. Life signs all stable, Yoon said, and her voice was doing something complicated. Bring them in, Vasek said. The airlock cycled. 4 people came through who'd been gone for 2 weeks and hadn't aged a day and smelled of something that was not quite salt water and not quite anything else, and the first one through, technician Kara Lim, who, before her disappearance, had been notable mainly for complaining about the coffee and doing consistently excellent drone maintenance, looked around the cramped interior of the submersible at all of them and said, in a very ordinary voice, they said to tell you they're sorry for the confusion, and then, because humans are what they are, somebody laughed. It started with Brasso, who'd been holding himself very still and rigid since the earthquake, and it spread fast, the way laughter always does in small spaces when it's been needed for a long time. Not hysterical laughter. Not the laughter of people who aren't taking things seriously. The laughter of people who've been underwater for months with bad coffee and broken equipment, and a corporation that treated them like expendable components, and who've just been told by a spacefaring species several billion years older than recorded history that the whole mess was, mostly, an accident, and everyone was going to be fine. Kara Lim smiled at all of them with the particular expression of someone who'd been somewhere outside normal experience and come back to find that normal experience was still exactly where she'd left it. Also, she said, they want to keep talking. They want. She hesitated, getting the words right. They said they want to find a way that doesn't end with one of us using up everything the other one has. Marin thought about the array she'd disassembled in the crawl space, the power lead she'd pulled, the small act of refusal that had cost her a career in deep-sea contracting but had probably saved a species. She thought, One species saves another and calls it a mistake to be corrected. She thought about Fenn's recorder, still running in the lab pocket of her suit. Everything documented, everything real, everything about to surface into a world that was still mostly run by men who called living things assets. She thought, we're going to have to fight for this. We're going to have to fight hard and dirty and for a long time. She looked at the porthole. Through it, the water was getting lighter as they rose. You could see, if you looked at the right angle, the surface as a faint brightening. Not the surface itself, but the promise of it. The world above, still broken, still burning through itself like something impatient, still pointing guns at things it didn't understand. Below, in the deep, patients older than cities, waiting to be heard. Marin Solis, structural analyst, saboteur, and now, she supposed, something like an ambassador, reached across and put her hand over Fenn's on the containment dish. It glowed faintly. Even here, even ascending, it caught what little light there was and held it. Okay, she said. To Fenn, to the dish, to whatever was listening. Let's go tell them. The submersible rose through the last of the dark water toward the light. Behind it, 3 kilometers down in the place where the station had been, something enormous and patient and ageless turned away from the wreckage and went back to the deep, where it had always lived, where it had been waiting a very long time for someone to answer. It did not seem discouraged. It seemed, if anything, and this was the hardest thing to translate, the part Fenn would spend years trying to get right in her papers, and Kara Lim would spend the rest of her life trying to explain in interviews. It seemed like the beginning of something. Not a threat, not a surrender, a conversation, the first real one.